I'd like to thank you for taking the time to attend tonight. It's very nice to see so many of you here for this debate, which I hope you're going to find informative. Also, I hope you're going to find it very stimulating and hopefully perhaps a little entertaining as well. It's widely reported that the planet is on the brink of an environmental disaster from which there is no return. Climate change features in the media headlines around the world, and warnings of the impact of climate change have come from many learned individuals for many years. So tonight we're going to be debating some of the issues affecting our environment, and we're joined by a panel tonight who are, in all of them, in some ways environmentalists. Amongst the panel, we've got a politician who chairs the Isle of Man Climate Change Citizen Forum. We have a chartered quantity surveyor with international experience in the construction industry. We've got a member of Manx Wildlife Trust with a background in research in the natural environment and environmental education. A tech software business owner who's also a member of the Change Citizens Forum, and a doctor and data analyst who is a sustainability expert and specialises in renewable energies. So I'm going to be asking them to introduce themselves to you in a short while, and then we'll open the debate from the floor, and we'll be discussing some of the points of view and questions from you guys, and then we'll be wrapping up around about 8 o'clock this evening. So before all that, what I'd like to do at this stage is get a show of hands on one or two questions from you guys. So what I'd like to know, if you just raise your hand, on who feels that human emissions play a major part in rapid climate change. Who feels that here? That's pretty much a majority. Got one or two shaking their head, but there we go. Who feels that climate change is nothing to be worried about and that humans have little impact? Okay, all right. So who feels it makes no difference what we do as individuals or what the Isle of Man does, and we should just leave it to others? Nobody, okay. Who's made changes in their lifestyle and consumption to help the environment? Anybody? Again, a good amount. And finally, contentious one, I think. Who would be happy to see an onshore wind turbines if it meant a quick route to zero carbon for the island? Interesting. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to welcome our panel, who are going to come up and introduce themselves. So please come along, guys, and take a seat. And we'll start this end. David.
Yes, hello, I'm Dave Quirk. I'm the earth scientist, and I won't bore you with my history, actually. I'm just going to say that the Isle of Man, its offshore wind energy is, on an annual basis, is 60 terawatt hours per year. And that's more than 40 times what's used on the Isle of Man for electricity, for transport, for heating, and for industry. Once you realise that the size of that resource, it's a question of being able to use it when you want it, which is a question of energy storage. We have the uplands and the water to do that. And so the vision is in the future that the Isle of Man can be entirely powered by, self-sufficient in renewable energy, and actually export surplus to the UK and Ireland. I think that's where we're heading, maybe within 20 years.
Hi, my name's Corelli Bentham. I think we've been advertised as a panel of experts here, so I can categorically say I am certainly no expert. I'm just old. I've been in construction 30 years. I'm a chartered quantity surveyor. I was head of construction at the college. And 2 weeks ago, my partner and I just launched a shiny new company called Builder Skill, which is for apprenticeships and MVQs. My particular passion is upskilling the construction industry. Thank you.
Thanks, Corelli. My name is Mike. I'm your resident software guy. I brought a software company to the island 10 years ago, and this is the most amazing place to live. I dive with some of you. around the island in my spare time. So I'm really passionate about biodiversity, also climate change and tech solutions to it. I'll probably be having a little debate with Dave later because the things he's saying is not what I've been told. I'm the small business stakeholder on the Isle of Man Climate Change Forum. So I've been liaising with 1,600 small businesses on the island, back and forth, just sharing the content from our sessions and sort of feeding that back to the climate change team. So that's me. I'm Mike.
Sarah Hickey, so I'm a conservation officer with Manx Wildlife Trust. I've spent most of the last few years surveying our uplands to see where our peat is and how much we have and what kind of condition it is in at the moment, so looking at restoring some of that. I also work as an ecological consultant as well, and I represent wildlife and biodiversity on the Citizens Forum.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Raoul Peake. 2015, I was lucky enough to be a member of the House of Keys, and since then, since 2016, I'm a member of the Treasury. My passion has been climate change, trying to actually get people to really see what's facing us, to see what opportunities we've actually got, how we can actually turn this from what is sometimes a fear into an opportunity, and how we can monetize that, and how we can actually have a great future living together with cleaner, greener energy. So I'm absolutely delighted that myself and Dave Quirk have brought together and formed the Energy and Sustainability Centre, because we actually want people to learn. We want people to learn together. We want government, the private sector and individuals to learn together on how we can put together a great energy system for the Isle of Man. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, panel. Now, I guess the audience have got many, many questions, and we're going to open that debate. I did ask some questions right at the start, so I'd like to sort of just pick up on one of those questions and put that to the panel. Now, you know, climate change, as I said, has been talked about for years now. Some of the world's leading experts tell us that we're nearly at the point of no return. And I asked a question tonight to say, who feels that climate change is nothing to be worried about and that humans have had little impact? If you look at the history of our planet, we've had an ice age, we've had all sorts of climate change. And I think there was a leading botanist, what was his name, David Bellamy, some years ago, who said climate change is a natural occurring phenomena. So perhaps, David, you'd like to pick that one up. So have humans had impact on the planet?
Yes, very, very definitely. The thing is, it's the speed that it's changing. It is phenomenal. We've never seen anything quite as quick as this. It's a scale way beyond volcanic eruptions. And so actually, a few years ago, I wasn't sure how bad it was, so I started collecting data and plotting it up, and it is really bad. I mean, there's no question there's a link between the emissions we're producing and have been since about 1850, the start of the Industrial Revolution, and now. And there's, you know, the real issue is there may be a lag time. And so really, if we stop now, temperatures will continue to rise. We're not quite sure by how much. So, you know, as ice melts, it's darker ground underneath, and that can heat up, absorb more sunlight. So, you know, really we need to get things turned around pretty damn quick.
Sarah, you've been involved in studies and environmental studies. You've done your research in there. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely agree with Dave. I actually studied peat cores many years ago at university as a part of a master's degree, looking at the pollen record of past climate change and reconstructing what the past climate change looked like. And it was a lot more gradual than it is now. The worrying thing, doing all the research about that at the time, was all the positive feedback that can happen as well. So one thing triggers something else. So positive isn't in a good sense. It's like I say, one thing triggering something worse, and that triggering something worse that maybe we can't come back from.
Ralph, you know, speaking as a politician, perhaps somebody who's been on the inside of the climate change debate, what's the other man doing in terms of thoughts of whether or not we're having an impact on climate change?
It's actually doing quite a lot of work. It's unfortunately some of the work's not very effective, and I think that's what the frustration is with what people see. So they don't actually see the Isle of Man doing any action. We heard that in the film earlier, but the legislation is now in place. So that's the one good thing that's come out of the last 5 years, I must admit, is the legislation is now in place to allow the government to take this seriously and actually release the MUA from their Electricity Act, so they then can start thinking about the environment and producing energy from not just fossil fuels, but from renewable sources. So the opportunity is there now. We did have a number of, if you like, false starts. I brought through the Climate Challenge Mitigation Strategy in 2016. That was adopted by Tynwald in 2016, but progress from the next administration was very slow around that. But the opportunity now is to pick that up, and as Dr. Quirk says, you know, the pressure now is on to start making the action, but it's in place, and it's down now to the politicians to lead, and it's about for the public to actually want to support those politicians that do want to take leadership in this particular issue and actually get action on the ground, so we can start to see how we can actually monetize this opportunity rather than being in fear of actually changing our lives and going to cost a lot of money. Let's turn that around and actually make some money out of it for the Isle of Man.
Okay, Mike and Corelli, I'm going to come back to you on that particular point. But when I did ask the question, pretty much everyone raised their hands. There were one or two people didn't. So let's take a view from the audience. Who'd like to make a comment on that? You, sir. Let me give you a microphone, because we can then pick that up, pick your voice up and pick that up on the film.
I'm Dr. Anthony Marshall. The person we should have here is my best friend in Australia, who was a chief meteorologist for the Australian Navy, who, when he listens to some of the things that have been said today, steam starts to come out of his ears. Now, why? Well, first off, let me make a very brief statement. I agree with a lot of the things that have been said, but unfortunately, when you mix all the different bits and pieces of science together, including bits and pieces of things that are happening, it confuses the issue. I think we've been making a terrible mess of looking after the planet. There's no doubt about that. It's been a disastrous mess for the best part of 200 years. But people have been, the so-called experts, telling us that we're on the verge of catastrophe and we're all going to get wiped out for at least the last 100 years. We've been getting 8 years before it's too late, 10 years before it's too late, and things just carry on. What I want to say is this, was while I support many things, I think we should get rid of all the plastics. If you get 1 million plastic bags entering the oceans every day, which is what has been claimed, then I think that who's responsible for that? Well, nearly all the pollution on the planet, which is man-made, is done by the major corporations, who could change all this quite easily. Now, you want sustainable energy? I've got equipment that I put in 25 years ago in companies in the UK, which cost almost nothing, that give 50% higher BTU emissions from usable gas. And we stopped putting them in because we got opposition from the government, who was on a major effort at the time to reduce energy. We were reducing energy, but they didn't want this. I could put people in the island in touch with a company in the United States that can produce energy out of the earth. It's called energy from the vacuum. I understand this fairly well. Costs nothing. The equipment costs next to nothing. And you can't get anything more energy and sustainable than that. And you can't get anything that's more environmentally friendly than that, but nobody wants to use it. We've had motor vehicles running on water for the past 25 years, and they won't allow that to come out for everybody. See, these are the real problems. These windmill things, which is what I call old childish technology, enormously expensive to put into place, environmentally damaging, that kind of thing is not the solution. And I'm just going to finish on this. When you mix all these other problems up with things like carbon dioxide is plant food. You reduce your carbon dioxide emissions and you get lower greenery, not more. You get lower food production. So the solution needs to be put in place, but not the things, because the solution that the big people at the top really want to put into place means a worldwide tax, more costs to everybody, pathetic, useless technology instead of stuff that is really available. You really tell me in the 21st century we can't do better than windmills to produce energy?
So, in effect, humans are having an effect on the planet.
Yes, but not on the climate. Not on the climate.
Yeah, but if you're saying to me that the corporations are
ruining the planet,
are ruining the planet, humans, are having an effect.
Yes,
so it's the corporations.
Not on climate change. I'll finish this to explain about climate change. Number one, the British Meteorological Society, the Russian Meteorological Society have recently said we're actually in the beginning of a new ice age, just recently. So much for climate change. The fact that you can come up with parts of the world that are having droughts or this one thing has always happened. But look at it this way. Real scientists, in my opinion, who are willing to tell the truth and don't have an ulterior motive, will agree on one thing. And this is this. This climate is controlled for its weather primarily from three sources. One, the sun, with the radiation from the sun. Two, as this planet travels through the solar system, we enter into higher and lower energy belts, which changes the weather. And finally, the movement and the effects on the ocean. Man effects on the actual climate is minimal. When Mount St. Helens blew in 1984, it was estimated that they put more toxic fumes and substances in the air in one day than every car, every combustion engine, every human-lit fire, and every aircraft since they were invented in one day. I don't think that is the solution to solving the problem, but you're right, we do need to do something about cleaning up the planet.
Okay, thank you. Nice Lancashire accent, by the way. Burnley, is it Burnley? Is it near Burnley?
No, I was born in Ashton-under-Lyne.
Oh, well, there you go.
Started the accents I found back in this part of the world.
Mike, can I give you a microphone and go over to you to comment?
Sorry, sir, what's your name?
Marshall Anthony.
Anthony, I'm Mike. So was the scientist you're referring to known as Moncton by any chance?
It's possible. Okay. I didn't bother collecting all the names.
Okay, so to answer your points, I'm trying to remember them, so correct me if I'm wrong. There are about 7 or 8. The first one is the scientists. So the International Panel on Climate Change is a UN organisation, and it's made up of 193 countries, correct me if I'm wrong, panel. If I'm wrong, it's like by 1 or 2, but it's 193 countries. Each one of those signs off on the evidence individually, every single one. Any of those country scientists has the right to veto. So if this happened, they'd be like, no, not happening. Their 6th report is actually not actually out yet, although a few weeks ago the summary was released. The summary states that in order to have the planet essentially at 1.3 Celsius degree warming, we need to rapidly and immediately decarbonize our economy, which is quite a big ask. So we're likely to get more than that. And just so you know what that looks like, can I ask how many people in here are over the age of 50? Okay. Seriously, Corelli? So I'll move this way. Sorry. So the freak weather event that happens once every 50 years, if you can remember it from your childhoods possibly, that drought, the wildfires, the strong winters, for example, any sort of energy event that had a lot of energy in it, well, that 1 in 50 at 1.4 degrees turns into 39.4 out of every 50 years. So that's why it's so important that we do something about it. Whether we argue it's man-made or not, that's just the way it is. I don't know if we're going to talk about man-made stuff or not, but perhaps one moderator will tell me not to. But yeah, there's a lot of sort of conflicting, stuff on the internet, as you'll find about anything, whether we're talking about climate change, or if we're talking about government policy, or if we're talking about Twin Towers or COVID, or whether Elvis is dead. But there's going to be, conflicting ideas on all sorts of things. But the idea is we're working with consensus, and the consensus is 193 countries, of which they have their own scientific panels. There would have to be one hell of a conspiracy to work with that many people.
Can I just reply to that for 30 seconds? Number one, I wouldn't believe anything the United Nations said about anything. Did you hear that? I wouldn't believe anything the United Nations said about anything. Next thing is this. Did you hear about the 80 billion tons of ice that has disappeared in the last 10 years from the east shelf of the Antarctic? You know about that, do you? But you know about the 200 million tons of ice that has actually increased on the west shelf? Yeah. You see, but you only ever hear about one side of it, you never hear the other side.
Yeah, all I would say is this is a climate change conspiracy. I'm happy to take it off.
Not a conspiracy.
No, I just mean that it's from what's called the Templeton Foundation. It's Professor Monckton, who isn't a professor at all. I think he's a professor of nutrition. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I'm happy to take this. I don't know how we want to do the debate. Do you want me to be quiet now?
I don't want to just sort of get stuck on a one-to-one, because many of you've got points of view. So I'd like to sort of pass the mic round a little bit, and I'm aware that Corelli.
That's very kind of you, because otherwise it could be a very boring evening. What I'm sure the people who are interested in the climate know is that the permafrost in the tundra, which contains the vast majority of the methane gas, is releasing that gas in Russia. There are enormous fires in Russia, in eastern Russia. That is a consequence of climate change. Yes, because we are changing the climate. I'm not saying that we are the only things that are changing it, but to actually ignore what we are doing on the basis that it may be inconvenient for us is a dereliction of our duty. I'm in my 80s, as this gentleman is, I'm quite sure. I have fears for my great-grandchildren as to what sort of planet they are going to live on. And the point was made earlier, and I won't say anything more than this. The point was made earlier that the majority of the people, a high percentage of the people, not say the majority, on this island don't believe in climate change. They also are old, and they couldn't care a toss
that's not true.
about their children.
That's not true. So there was a government survey that was done earlier in the year, which Ralph knows all about, by a marketing and PR company. They interviewed over 1,000 people from the island, and found that the sort of belief in climate change, or the belief we need to do something about it, is at 52%. And this is on par with other islands. It's not like an age thing. Isn't like anything like that. It's just across the board. Maybe slightly skewed towards the younger generation, actually.
Okay, Corelli, can we get a comment here from you, please?
I think Dr. Marshall's comments regarding climate change actually that's a sidestep, because actually what you were saying was you acknowledge think climate is changing. Whether it's us that's affecting it is actually irrelevant, because what we're trying to propose, all of us, in changing our lifestyles is the right thing to do, isn't it? It's just morally right. So actually, you do agree. I think your comments, absolutely. So let's just dump that idea. That's gone. It was all your other comments about the alternative uses. Now that's really interesting. That's what we should be debating and learning about, not whether it exists or not, because it's irrelevant, I think.
Yeah, very true. David, perhaps, as a data analyst, if we can maybe get a comment from your perspective.
Anybody can plot it up themselves. The data's out there. It's very easy, and there's a very, very close correlation between what we're emitting, the concentrations of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and the rise in temperature. And also you can plot up production of cars, and you can see they all match perfectly well. If you plot up population, actually the correlation is poorer. And the reason for that is because of development. Countries are developing much quicker, the richer countries, and so they're having a bigger impact. So it's, population is blamed. It's not entirely a population thing. It's actually our lifestyle, the high carbon lifestyle.
Some interesting statistics in the film that we saw with regard to the carbon emissions and the carbon footprint that we have here on the Isle of Man. Anybody got any comments on that? There we go.
Sorry, my comment wasn't quite exactly on that. It was actually bringing it much closer to home, onto the Isle of Man. I'm going a bit on a tangent now, if you bear with me. Are you, as a panel, familiar with donut economics? There's a couple of nods. Okay. Yes or no? Maybe. For those that are, do you think the Isle of Man can actually bring themselves within donut economic framework? I know Tokyo is looking at doing it now. Barcelona are doing it. Amsterdam's doing it. I think Oregon might be looking at it as well. So this is basically, it's an economic model that is using Earth's planetary trying to get humanity within Earth's planetary boundaries, whilst also within a social limit, to live in the just and safe space for humanity. So it's kind of moving away from neoliberal economic theory of the 19th and 20th centuries into something that's much more relevant to the 21st century, where it's not all about financial growth, economic growth. It's actually about, it's kind of growth agnostic, and it's more about bringing humanity in this safe space to allow the future of humanity. And climate change is a very, very central part to that. I'll be interested to know what the panel think if the Isle of Man would be able to achieve that.
I thought we were going to get some Krispy Kremes then when you were talking about donut economics. I'm going to hand that one over to Ralph.
Thank you very much. But yes, I think it'd be a major plank of our future economic activity, as well as a great opportunity for the island to have an income that could quite possibly 10% of our cost of actually running the government at the moment. So it's a great opportunity to do this, and to ignore it would be derogation of our duty. I think that I do hear the word climate change is quite confusing for a lot of people. So if you just sort of move away from that, move away from the discussions on weather and climate change, but it's quite clear that burning fossil fuels actually produces unpleasant side effects. And that does have an impact on human beings. And that does, in the UK, it's been attributed to deaths in the UK. And there's 30,000 deaths in the UK from breathing issues. And I think it was just last year the first person actually who died, and they actually attributed the fossil fuels were actually contributing to their death. So that's the real issue we've got. So every time we keep burning fossil fuels, we're contributing to a poorer air quality. So if we can actually have energy without emissions, that's then moving forward to renewable energy without emissions, to a new industry, an economic input to the island, where we can actually then enjoy and attract other people to live here, other businesses who want to be part of this economic activity that actually then has energy without emissions.
Sarah.
Yeah. I was just going to come back to your point about living in a sort of the donut economics model. I do think for a long time, well, not just on the island, but everywhere, we've been focused on growth, and it's all about growth and exploiting our natural environment for wealth. And I don't think we can do that anymore. I mean, even just on the island, for example, you can see it more clearly. We're on a small island. We've got limited natural environment, and if we keep growing, we're not going to be able to. We need to be able to live in a sustainable way where everyone has a suitable, reasonable standard of living. We're not making vast sums of wealth, but we're all living comfortably within the natural environment. So we need to look after the environment so it can look after us. And if you look at that as on an Isle of Man scale, it's kind of obvious if we were just, we're an island, but you could think of it on a global scale as well, because we're a finite, we're on one planet, so we've got limited resources and we need to live sustainably within that.
Can we just come down the panel and go to Mike and talk about the economic issues, Mike?
Yeah, I disagree with Sarah. So I think that there is an economic incentive to, oh, by the way, when I say disagree with Sarah, by the way, on biodiversity, which is kind of linked to the environment, as Andrew was saying, and climate change, they're all part of this sort of bubble of environmentalism. So we're agreed on that. But in terms of looking at GDP, quality of life, the society that we have, yeah, there's a massive opportunity here. For example, there's a business in the north of the island that is now quite a large business, actually. It's based in an old film studio, and they are predominantly running off renewable energy, and they're exporting what they're not using down the grid for the rest of us to use. But unfortunately, it's not going for the rest of us. It's going to be sold to the UK for a loss, because that's just the way our electricity works at the moment, our grid. So yeah, there is an opportunity actually for implementing renewables, reducing the amount of energy we use, reducing the amount of food waste we use, reducing the amount of land use we use. In fact, our tree coverage on the island, which is about to get worse when all our ash trees die off in the next couple of years. Our land use is really bad here. We have an awful lot of fields. Fields, by the way, are sort of biodiversity deserts, which, we have fields, cattle, we then eat the cattle. We have other fields which we then grow crops to feed the cattle. So our tree coverage here is about half of what the UK has, which is again about half of what Europe has.
And
sort of
has 70%.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is indeed a UNESCO biosphere nation, which is entirely renewable, which is actually it's not just entirely renewable, it's carbon negative, and it's Bhutan, I think, or Burma. One of those two, beginning with B. Small island nation, it's UNESCO biosphere. We're another UNESCO biosphere, and we're kind of on the other end of that scale. So it would be nice for us to move to a more renewable future.
Okay. I'd like to come to you, sir, in a minute, but I just want a comment from Corelli on the economic issues. I mean, you're in the business of growing a business.
I'm in the business of making money too. So controversially, this may be, I think the economy has to be at the centre of... Sorry. I think the economy has to be at the centre. I do.
The people are at the centre, not economy.
Yeah. Okay.
Let me just pass that on. I understand what you're saying. But I'd like to take a comment from you, sir.
All I said was that I thought the economy wasn't the most important thing in life, is what basically what you're saying. The whole of society revolving around economic activity. I'm saying that it's people that come first, and it's how they behave that produces whatever economics there are. It's not economics for its own sake, which is basically what you're saying. That's what the whole growth thing is. Growth is good. You know that because it's not even contested. When the BBC News, the ITV News, announces that growth's gone up to 3 points, they're all smiling because this is good. Now, we have to question whether it is good, because not all growth is the same kind of thing. You're just looking at growth in terms of percentages and actual sums of money. You're not looking at what that means in activity terms or in people terms. And I'm saying you've got to put people first. That's all.
And it all comes down to consumption. We consume too much. And we need to think about our own, start with ourselves and look at what we're consuming.
So the world at the moment is consuming 3 times what it actually can sustain. That's slightly over 3 times. So that's not just energy, or it's the materials that are going in lithium-ion batteries, for example. We just can't continue the way we're going. We have to recycle everything. So it's not just the climate, as people have been saying. It's actually just our consumption is the issue. Yeah.
So if you've got an issue whereby we've got to change our habits, certainly it starts with education, doesn't it? Education is the way forward, isn't it? You're in the business of educating people, aren't you? I'll come to you in a moment.
Has to start with education, but it should be. In fact, I was listening to a Manx radio. I shouldn't say that in front of you.
No, not really.
What was his name? Andy Wint was talking on the Manning line last week about plastic bags, and he said quite wisely, "I wasn't given the choice to use a plastic bag. I was just given one. And when we buy our comfort or whatever, it comes in plastic, doesn't it? So in terms of education, we almost shouldn't have a choice. Let's just be green. It's there, and so you don't have to educate people then. There isn't green choices and the utopia that we're aspiring to. It's just is.
Okay. You, sir, you were first.
Just a quick question. Has it been estimated how many wind turbines would be needed on the island to achieve zero emissions or to...
Yeah, so if you were going to power the island entirely with wind, and this was assuming the storage as well, that you can therefore use the power, the surplus, you can use it when you need it, you would need about 40 square kilometres of wind turbines. Now, it depends whether it's a big one every square kilometre or whether it's a 3 or 4 small ones. Onshore is actually, funnily enough, more efficient, but for that 40 square kilometres would be offshore. So, and that's actually quite a small wind farm. You're seeing bigger ones in the distance there, and they're of no benefit to the Isle of Man. So, as long as you can store it so that you can power the island when there's a call for it, when the demand. So it's a significant area, but it's definitely doable. It's a small part of the Isle of Man territorial sea.
I'm not familiar with wind turbines, but are they independent of fossil fuels?
There are emissions in producing steel, and of course, if there's cement. So there are emissions, but if it's a 25-year life, then it's relatively small. The issue with wind turbines at the moment is recycling them, and they're getting there, but it's not quite there yet.
Okay. I'd like to come to the young man at the back who's had his hand up for a little while, and it's nice to get the view of a younger person, or significantly younger than I am.
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah. So this is probably a bit redundant now because we've moved on since, but I was an economics student until a few months ago, and just when we were talking about donut economics and what this gentleman here said before about growth, and you actually touched on it a bit, growth in itself is not a bad thing, and the economy, in my opinion, absolutely comes before anything else. Growth is not a negative thing, it's actual things. So like Mike set his business up and he's done that, and that's growth, and he's created value through doing that. He might have caused damage to the environment, or he might have improved the environment, but growth in itself is not a bad thing. And I think it's quite naive to believe that we could have a society that is productive and adding value that is just based on like donut economics, which is like redistribution. We're all happy, and you need incentives, you need growth, and that's a good thing. So I just thought it's a bit redundant.
It's the society we live in, but I guess what you're saying really is it depends on how you grow and what you do to grow, rather than just growth as a concept.
Yeah, but growth behind the percentage is things happening. It's value being added to an economy, and that is fundamentally why we're all here. It's how all these cameras are made. It's fundamentally brilliant. So it's very, as I said, naive to think that we could just sit around and go, oh, we'll just sit how we are. We've got nice cars, we've got food in the shop, so we're happy. A lot of the world isn't like that. There needs to be incentives to grow.
The problem is if India grows at that rate and China grows at that rate that we have got, that's where you need to rethink it. You're saying, okay, well, it can't, the whole world can't go to our level as we currently do it. We have to find another way of dealing with all the material we use and all the power we use. We need to do it in a different way, because if the rest of the world has our standard of living, we are completely screwed.
Yep. So, but through growth isn't a bad thing. We don't have to grow the same as we have done in the past. We can have amazing power companies that build millions of windmills that make loads of money for shareholders, whatever, but we're still building windmills, we're going carbon neutral. The growth isn't bad, and we don't all have to sit around and going, oh, look, isn't life nice? Let's stay how we are and let's share it out. You need incentives, you need big corporations that have the ability to fund. I can't go and build a wind farm because I don't have the capital for it.
It's called capitalism.
It's called capitalism. And you look at all the nations that have been successful in history, and they're all very capitalist economies, and it works.
Mike, you want to make a comment on
Oh,
that?
just very quickly. Oh, sorry, very loud. Booming. Yeah, so in terms of growth, right, who pays your pension if anybody's in receipt of a private pension, right? A lot of those are linked to various market indexes like S&P and whatever, and predominantly the vast majority of the biggest companies at the top of there are the world's biggest polluters. So that's one huge side of that. But then not all economic growth is linked to material consumption. There's a lot of growth, for example, in the high-tech industries, the software, for example, which doesn't necessarily need huge amounts of renewables, huge amounts of energy. So yeah, not all business growth means we're digging something out of the ground and then we're turning it into value. That's it.
Okay. Bill had his hand up for a while. Bill?
Yeah, thank you, Ron. I'd be interested in the panel's view on what they would say to people who don't want to change. They accept that actually things aren't great and we should change, but I don't want to change. Interestingly, people feel threatened by simple initiatives like the active travel strategy, which not only would help reduce our carbon emissions, but actually it just facilitates our children walking to school. So there's health benefits, and they feel threatened because that affects their daily routine. It doesn't actually, it would probably help their daily routine, but they feel threatened. So that's just one example of many changes that people might be asked to make, but they don't want to change. What would you say to them?
Sarah, can I ask you to comment on that?
Yeah, I think that has to come down to government and other organisations enabling change to happen in a much smoother, simpler way. So, for example, if we're saying to people, you can't drive your cars anymore, they're polluting, we need to provide easily affordable alternatives. So it could be free public transport that's run on electric vehicles, for example. So it needs to be something that's not a massive change, but people need to be enabled to make those changes in an easy way. And I do think that needs to come from either companies leading the way or government legislating for that.
Ralph, so in order to convince people to change, you need to build a better infrastructure, maybe locally, better buses, more convenience for people to get rid of their cars. What can the Isle of Man do to help people to change in their habits?
Yes, you're absolutely right. It is about removing that fear of change. So yes, we can pilot things, buses, for instance, how we can get people to migrate onto the buses, use the buses more. We could pilot a scheme where the buses are free. We can monitor that and see, has that nudged enough people onto the buses? We can then diversify the routes. We can then have a system where people are being picked up. These are all things that we can try, and then we can then measure, see if it's working, and change again. But yes, it's reducing that fear, and as Sarah says, to make things easy, to remove those barriers that people think, oh, well, no, I'm not going to do that. It's just too difficult. Remove the barriers, make it easier, so then you can make your choice.
David, I mean, you live in Denmark, don't you?
Yeah,
Is it a cultural thing?
I
do you
can
think?
tell you it is fantastic not owning a car. When you've got very good public transport, we have an app, we can find it immediately. We have electric cars sitting in the streets that are charged from renewable energy. We can pick those up at any stage and drop them off anywhere. Life is so much better without having to own a car. It's cheaper as well, a lot cheaper. You need to have a cheap lifestyle in Denmark because tax is fairly high there. But no, it makes your life a lot better if you don't have to worry about a car.
Corelli, you've got international experience. What would you say to the people in Hong Kong to get them to stop using their cars?
They don't use cars in Hong Kong, really. It's all the public transport is absolutely phenomenal. Taxis are dirt cheap. But interestingly, a bit closer to home, I was chatting to a friend in London, and they've got an initiative at the moment. She's got rid of her car, and she's got an app on her phone, finds a car locally, clicks it opens up, she picks up the keys, drives, and it charges you per mile or something, and you just car share. I mean, how fabulous is that?
Is it an electric car?
Yeah.
Okay.
Isn't that...
Mike?
Oh, I'm going to be disagreeing with everyone again. So I love the technology here, and I've been involved in some of it as well. And it's tremendously exciting. And do you know what? It's created whole new industries. Massive industries, Uber, Lyft, and so on, and the scooter e-sharing and stuff. Across in England, you can get a scooter, which if you're able to ride it, of course, and it's 20p per minute. And that sounds bad, but they're really fast. So yeah, really, really good. But guys, we're on the Isle of Man. Now, I like to think of myself as very futuristic, very forward-thinking. But I don't know, like Denmark's, Europe, great places. I was born in Germany. It's brilliant. It's better public transport-wise than here. But we live in a really cold place, and when the Gulf Stream switches off, it's about to get even worse. The geography is really bad. Our population is 7 years older than the UK. So it's nice to say active travel. My mum's in a wheelchair. And it's even better if we can say the government will send a bus to pick her up. But then what happens to the taxi, the taxi drivers who are really unhappy with this sort of initiative? So I don't know the answer, but it's just something before we go, no cars, no cars, no cars, no cars. Why? And we need to think about the impact that would have on the elderly, the disabled, people who live rurally, anyone who lives outside of Douglas. I used to live in London, and you're mad if you have a car there. Absolutely mad. And when I travel across, if I use public transport, I use Uber and everything, and it's brilliant. But on the Isle of Man, we need to have more of a hybrid solution, I think. Manx solutions for Manx problems, I believe it said.
How many people have got a car? Just a show of hands. How many people in the audience have got a car? Okay. Let me ask you a question then. How many people would do away with their cars if the Isle of Man improved dramatically its public transport system? I'm not just talking about buses. I'm talking about bringing back trains, and I'm talking about lowering taxi fares and perhaps introducing something like Uber here. So how many people would do away with their cars if we had a better infrastructure? You'd use it less. Okay. You shook your head and said you wouldn't get rid of your car. Why not?
No, I think it's been highlighted with the topology of the Isle of Man, and to travel, and if you're going places, if you're going to go walking in the woods, even go cycling, cycling out in the forest, you need transport that's ad hoc.
And if you ever see an active travel poster, it's always sunny. And by the way, I'm up for active travel, by the way. I'm fortunate enough to have a £3,000 electric bike. It's absolutely brilliant. I did a YouTube video where I swapped my car for a bike for a week, and it wasn't fun, I tell you. And I definitely can't take it diving. I've got 45 kilos of kit, and I need to take it to the other end of the island. But it's true that if things were better, then I'd use a car less, obviously, yeah.
Could I say one more thing on this?
Yeah, sure. Let me just get a microphone, and then we can pick you up on the audio.
Thank you. We can talk about the bigger picture. Whether or not we agree with everything globally really is irrelevant. There's 100,000 times more scale than the Isle of Man, whatever we do. But I do believe we should do the right thing to improve the Isle of Man. The thing is, your principles cost you money, seriously. And the point has been made about there's a lot of anti-business approach to this because they're seen as the pariahs that are polluting. But the economy has been mentioned, and unless we have money to pay for things, it will not happen. Choices don't happen. We're up and down the road, and every day cans are thrown out the window. That can stop instantly, but people don't make that choice. As far as incentives are concerned for e-bikes or other methods, it's going to have very limited effect. If you talk about electric cars, there's two sides to that story on actually producing them in the first place, and lithium and so on. But if that were to be a solution for the Isle of Man to give you transport that's clean, given that the electricity generated is green source of whatever colour green, my approach would be to say our new MHKs should represent the Isle of Man externally. We can look after ourselves internally, commissioners and otherwise, but go out, sell the Isle of Man, bring in £1 billion of extra business and give every family an electric car. That would be my solution. Earn the money first and then decide what you spend it on, whatever measures to counter climate change, to improve the Isle of Man in all respects, in the green environment and sustainably. But to think you can do it by not earning money, I think it just won't happen.
So the economy, you need the money to do it. The economy's got to be buoyant to do it. Ralph, how are we going to solve this one? How are we going to improve the economy in a sustainable way on the Isle of Man to be able to be a shining example to the world of how eco-friendly we are?
Okay, so you bring those things together. You actually bring them together. You actually create a new industry. You actually generate your income from creating renewable energy by storing that energy here on the Isle of Man by a pumped hydro scheme. And then when the market's right, you can then sell the stored energy. So then you create your industry, you create new jobs, and you then create the opportunity to have income. So that's where you bring all those things together. So you're then not using fossil fuels, you're using renewable energy, storing it and selling it at a profit when the price is high.
And the other thing you would do is make sure that electricity was very cheap here, certainly off-peak. So essentially, you wouldn't be paying for petrol anymore. And we're thinking the same also for heating in the homes. Imagine if you've got a warm, dry house the entire year and you don't need to worry about switching it off. That's really that's the situation we've now got in Copenhagen. Our house, I mean, if you saw the energy that goes out of my 18th century house, I mean, there's more than just me, it's not big. But if you saw how much energy we lose, but there's so much being produced from the wind and the other sources like biomass, it's not a problem because you always have enough energy to heat your house, and it's dry and it's warm and it's just fantastic. The winter is no worse than the summer, and you can have that situation here if you plan it properly.
Corelli, can we sort that out from a construction point of view?
We can sort it out from a construction point of view, but I think people are quite naive about construction in terms of they don't understand how long it takes to train. A plumber or an electrician, it takes 4 years, and then they're not specialists in the renewables, etc. So it's not something we can just turn on just like that and go, right, let's do this, we'll get these in. We haven't got the trades, and this isn't an island issue, it's a global issue. It's hard attracting people into construction in the first place, so we've got skill shortages, we definitely have on the island, so it's something that we can fix, but it will take time, and therefore we need to be planned and measured about it.
Okay. Mike, how do we earn £1 million and give everyone a free electric car?
I wish I knew that. We've got two in our household. We've got a second-hand Nissan Leaf, the cheapest electric car you can buy, and we have something of the other side of that scale as well. In Ireland, you can't build a new build, and haven't been able to for some time, with a fossil fuel boiler. And in England, you can't now build anything new without an EV charger installed. And in some places around the world, well, these are two neighbours, and in some places around the world, you can't build without putting solar in, So I suppose there's some things that government can do that just seem to me to be really, really easy. Why isn't it done yet, Ralph?
Because it's been overlooked by that department. The opportunity is there to change the building control regulations, and I agree with you that could have been changed at the start of this administration. It was certainly in the strategy in 2016, and we're just gliding at the moment, and that is a great shame. That is a great shame, but it can be changed very quickly. If there's a will there, it can be changed to start building homes that are fit for the future with no fossil fuel central heating. You're absolutely right.
And in terms of the developers, there's a well-known developer that everybody will have heard of on the island, so I won't mention them, but you can guess. Rara. And they have actually said to a client that they can't put air source heat pumps in because they go rusty on the Isle of Man.
Oh, you're kidding. You are absolutely kidding. And you know what, right? Installing these things makes it so much cheaper for the people that buy their properties.
What I was going to say is, if you knew in 2040 that electricity there's going to be so much and it was cheap, what would you do now? I think that's what we need to say, is that maybe it'd be 2045, it might be 2038. But if you can say, this is the goal we're going for, how do we, once you know that, hey, that's what it's going to be cheap to, very cheap electricity.
Why do you think it's going to be cheap?
What would you do? Because it's free fuel.
Right, but so in my conversations with the Climate Change Transformation team and board, and it's fine, this is good, this is going to get entertaining now. No, it's not. So the cheapest solution is another interconnector and 17% more on our electricity bills.
Yeah.
Is it not?
So the problem is, if you buy electricity, you have to pay for it. Wind is actually free. All you need to do is invest in wind turbines.
And storage.
So
can we not have wind turbines and use the UK as storage?
They don't have any storage. They would use us.
They use Norway, wouldn't they?
Well, at the moment, they are building an interconnector to Norway. They don't have what they need. They're close to blacking out, actually. So who's the first people are going to turn off when they get on this knife edge at the moment is going to be the Isle of Man. So what you can offer to Ireland and to UK is storage here.
Okay, so I think that whatever we're going to do that's better, well, that's more expensive, right? In fact, during our conversations on the climate change team, transformation board, forum, citizens forum, the volunteers, broadly speaking, the general consensus was that we want to be an independent and secure island. We want to generate stuff here. We want to be
self-sufficient.
Self-sufficient, yeah, and that's more expensive than being a dependent.
Yeah, that's not true.
Okay.
I don't think money's
right. Okay, let's go to the audience, because there's got to be a number of comments. I'll come to you in a second. I know I can see you absolutely boiling. One more comment from you, sir.
There was mention just a few moments ago about heat source, air source heat pumps. I happen to have one.
Do you like it?
I like the heat pump. However, and in fact, certainly during the summertime, I'm getting, for every kilowatt put in, I'm getting about 9 out. And this is the first year I've had it running. People normally talk about 3, but that's not the point. The situation in the Isle of Man is identical to the one in the United Kingdom. The problem you have, which was alluded to, is people who actually understand the heat pump, because what most people don't realise is that a heat pump is only a heat source. It is part of a system, and the system is everything that goes into your home. And it needs controlling relative to your needs. Unfortunately, the majority of people who put heat pumps in, and Mitsubishi, which is where I got mine from, they only sell heat pumps to electricians that they've trained. Now, the electrician doesn't know anything about the rest of the home, but some of us here have got proper professional qualifications. If, when I was in practice, I'd done something wrong, I would be pulled up in front of my professional organisation and disbarred. However, these individuals can put heat pumps in, and as far as the Isle of Man is concerned, Manx Utilities is actually subsidising putting heat pumps in, because you can buy them via the Isle of Man Electricity Authority, and it's paid for out of the savings you make on your bill. But there's no quality to make sure that it's operating properly. And if it's not, and somebody has put something in and has not done it properly, you have, having spent very large sums of money, you have no recourse at all.
Can I just
Corelli,
ask,
you
because I'm on
answer
this
that
one, I love this. Right, can I just ask, I know not everyone has got air source heat pumps or any particularly renewable technologies, but everyone's had a tradesman or woman in their house, haven't they? Yeah? Yep. Show of hands, yes. Who's asked if they're insured? Well done. Oh, is that no one? Oh, one, well done. Who's asked if they've got a trades card? 2. Did you notice I didn't even put my hand up? My husband's sitting there and he hasn't put his hand up. We're in construction. We get people in, and it's a drive to the bottom, isn't it? Yeah. We go, cheapest, yeah, you're in construction. And it's so wrong. We're not asking the right questions. We're not getting accredited people in. We're not getting the professionals in, the ones that have served their time, that will be more expensive because they are insured and they've done their trade.
Before I come to the young lady over there, I just want to pass this over to Ralph, just to make a comment from your experience within our government. How are we coping with monitoring tradespeople? What's in place to keep us safe and
right?
Free
So
from...
Tynwald did agree on £7.2 million being put to one side for the green energy scheme. But you're absolutely right. Corelli's absolutely right. We've actually held that back, releasing the money, until we do have surveys carried out free of charge on the home, but also that the trades have had the time to be trained up to get the relevant qualifications. So there is a period between now and April where that training will happen and the people will be able to get qualified. So that's exactly why we've held that back, because if we would have just actually allowed that money to go straight out, would have been disappointed people, jobs then that weren't saving any CO2 in worst case scenario, and we'd have an unhappy customer. And that customer would then not come back. They wouldn't believe anything else that's been said. So it's really important that we do work together, that we do actually get trained up, qualified, and people then can have some assurance and hopefully some recourse if something goes wrong. But at least then we're measuring before and we're measuring after.
Okay, we're kind of rapidly running out of time here, but you were going to burst.
Thank
so
you.
I had to give you the
It's only
microphone.
a really quick one. I just would really love to open the topic of recycling to the panel, and when people are taking their bits to the tip and stuff to recycle, where that actually is going, and I'd love to hear people's.
I'm glad you made the point, because that was going to be my next point. In the film, recycling was touched upon. So, recycling on the Isle of Man. We might as well start with you, Ralph. You've got the microphone. Does recycling exist?
It does exist, and certainly people who are lucky enough to live in Douglas do actually have a recycling service that's collected from your home, which you take part in, which is great. So at least then people are getting to the habit of actually separating out some of their materials and actually having it collected. I'm not saying it's all island-wide, but it's certainly something that we should be doing.
Can I ask you what happens to it when it's separated out?
It goes into the system. I mean, it is.
What does the system do?
Yeah. Okay. So it is actually processed, and it is either treated with here on the Isle of Man. Some of it is burned, and some of it is recycled.
Okay, I'll give you a little example.
Thank you.
My wife has a coffee shop.
Yep.
And her customers are coming in and saying, "Do you recycle your coffee cups?" And Sarah thought about it and said, "No, we don't." So she made a phone call. She made a phone call into the corporation, spoke to somebody in there who said, "Well, no, we don't recycle." "Well, what do you do with it?" "Well, it all goes together and it gets burnt." So the people that are in Douglas who are doing their thing to be environmentally friendly and taking the time and the trouble to wash out the containers, it's rubbish because it gets burnt.
Okay, but that is a habit. At least we're starting to get into a habit of actually collecting it, at least doing something with it. So, okay, that's not ideal, but at least that is starting the habit.
It doesn't do an awful lot for the population, does it? No. What, sorry? It keeps them warm. Yeah.
There's actually a bigger issue than recycling, though. I've got a figure. 32% of landfill waste comes from construction and the demolition and of building materials, and 13% of that is materials that have never been used.
Okay. Listen, I want to just throw this quickly back to here. Let me give it to you, guys. No, you go for it.
It was to move on slightly, to be honest. I think recycling is a bit of misdirection because it's all resource use. And what we need to look at is reusing or not using at all. And we've done the economy question, that sort of thing. I wanted to move it on to natural solutions and what the panel thought about whether natural solutions could be a solution to the climate change issue, and also biodiversity. We've talked about 40 square kilometres of wind turbines. We know that there's issues with wind turbines and birds and marine life if it's marine-based wind turbines. What's the solution there? I think that there's a problem that, again, it's about looking after our own survival. We need electricity, so we're going to do whatever we have to do it, and not stopping and thinking about the effect that we're going to have on wildlife, biodiversity, the natural planet that, at the end of the day, we live on.
Okay, I'm going to come to David on that, but I just want one final comment on the recycling issue for the young lady there.
Thanks. Yeah, we've just set up a recycling collection company for the rest of the Isle of Man who don't get it. And we've been following through because for us it was really important to know where it does end up. And I think a lot of people, for us, we just want to help everyone that we can because we think it should be in everyone's homes. But for some people, they think, well, it doesn't matter because the tip's just down the road from me, that I can take it anyways. But I think there's a lot of miseducation because they don't understand really where it does end up when it goes there. And I think maybe just needs to be a bit more clarity as where things end up in the end. And, that's what we're trying to do, trying to help so we can follow the audit trail. But for some people, I think it would be great for a bit more openness.
Right. Thank you. Right, I want to come back to, is it Graham or Gary? Graham. I want to come back to Graham's point and perhaps hand that over to Mike.
Okay, wow, there's lots of things there. Okay, so recycling, Graham's right. Reduce, reuse, recycle. That's like the last step. Like if it gets to recycling, you've done something wrong. Me too. I'm just saying you know what I mean. The point about biodiversity, gosh, definitely one for Lee Morris at the back there. But, you know, the island's biodiversity is under considerable threat from the way that we behave as people. Our land use is pretty bad, I've got to say. I ditched eating animal products 2 years ago as a result, literally because it's just not efficient. It's just not an efficient use of our land resources. Our sea resources as well, actually, it's pretty good. Apparently, we're very, very good with managing and protecting our seas. But there's more work that can be done. A lot of the waste in the marine environment comes from fishing gear. In fact, there's a Great Pacific patch, and the majority of that, more than 50% of that, is fishing gear. So when we think about the seal, the seal, where is that one too? When we think about the turtles and things with like plastic straws affecting them, and we see all these very emotional things in documentaries and in the media, we probably need to think more about the microplastics that's in basically every piece of seafood that you want to eat, and that goes into you. And this is a new phenomenon since the 1960s. So, you know, things are getting bad really quickly in our lifetime.
Can I pass on to Sarah?
Yeah, I'd just like to answer your point firstly about nature-based solutions. So I'm sure a lot of you are aware of it's kind of using nature to kind of deal with the problems that we've created. And in terms of climate change, they do have a really important role to play. But I don't think they should be used as a substitute for reducing emissions. So nature-based solutions that we're currently working on the Isle of Man are peatland restoration to reduce the emissions from peatland and hopefully sequester more carbon. We're looking at increasing forest cover, again, to absorb more carbon. And also looking at marine issues such as seagrass planting to, again, absorb more carbon. But we shouldn't be using these really important things as an excuse to carry on emitting, because actually we need to reduce our emissions, and those things need to help take the excess carbon out of the atmosphere. So they've got a really important role to play, but alongside everything else. And I think the other point about being aware of wildlife and biodiversity in all the changes we're making is really important. For example, you know, there might be lots of changes to building regulations where in future houses are completely sealed and, you know, to keep the warmth in. However, how is that going to affect animals that have come to rely on those buildings? So we need to take those things into account. So, for example, bats. New buildings maybe need to have bat boxes as a standard, you know, addition, or some kind of cavity within the roof space to provide for those animals, nesting birds as well. We just need to take a sort of holistic view, I think, rather than just focusing on climate change, because we are also in an ecological crisis as well.
Can I get a final word from David, please?
So on natural solutions, of course, you can build wind turbines now from wood. You can also build your houses from wood. There's a lot of Manx stone around. You can build your houses from Manx stone. There's just a different way of thinking is required. And so they're all natural solutions, actually. And again, between wind turbines, if it's offshore, you're not fishing. So there's different ways of, you can have you can be encouraging seagrass or kelp. You can, again, sequester. So it's just a different way of thinking. You think, what would the minimum impact be if I did this? Now, that will cost a bit more. Is that a better way, or should I, you know, am I going to go for the cheapest?
Okay. Well, that seems like a really good time to sort of wrap things up. We've rapidly run out of time. I've just got to repeat a couple of these questions, and I'm going to amend them slightly just with a show of hands after what you've heard this evening. Now, who feels climate change is nothing to be worried about and that humans have little impact? Okay. I'm going to ask two other questions on this, and I'm going to slightly alter one. Who will make changes in their lifestyle and consumption to help their environment. Okay. And finally, would you be happy to see onshore wind turbines if it meant a quick route to zero carbon for the island? Good. Well, look, thank you very much indeed for your attendance. I'd just like you to please give our panel a round of applause, show your appreciation. And our thanks for your attendance as well. A few years ago, I had the pleasure of working with some North American Indians of the Seminole tribe. And I just want to leave you with a quote, which comes from North American Indians. It's a proverb. It says, "Treat the earth well. It was not given to you by your parents. It was loaned to you by your children. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. Make sure we leave it in good order." Thank you very much.
You can't turn back time, but together we can change the future. If you could create a better world with one small action, would you? Would you? Would you? Be part of the story. Be part of the story. Be part of the story.
Be part of the solution. Our future is in your hands.
Our future is in your hands. Do it for us. Do it for us. Do it for us. Do it for us. Change tomorrow.